Many of us have been looking for clues that something new is available to discover. We surrendered the need to defend our certainty and opened our minds to new possibilities and understandings that we would not have previously considered. We are learning to trust our intuition and the clues the universe gives us. We are rediscovering our connection with nature, finding truth, wisdom, and intrigue under every rock.
At first, many of us were afraid of this type of journey. It's a natural response to the unfamiliar, and we fear losing what we already believe to be true. But if something is valid, it won't evaporate because we discover something new that is also true and valid and interesting. If what we consider truth or wisdom doesn't survive while we explore, maybe it wasn't true in the first place anyhow.
Leaning forward is an attitude. It is a posture, and it is the starting place of all adventures and discoveries.
May you find what you didn't even know you were looking for.
Hi, I'm Karl Forehand. I just want to welcome you to the Leaning Forward Conference. This is our third year doing this conference, and we really hope that you are gaining a lot of insight and information and healing through all of the speakers that are here this weekend. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I am the wife of Karl Forehand. We have done the Desert Sanctuary podcast for several years now. And we really enjoy hearing and listening and just being a part of the stories of the people that we've interviewed. We consider them sacred, and we're very thankful that people trust us with their stories. In addition to that, I am a mother of 3 grown adult children, JD, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about him on the podcast. He lives in Taiwan, our daughter Abigail, and our daughter Lily. And with those 3 children come 3 amazing grandchildren, Holland, Sloan, and Jackson. So when I'm not just snuggling my grandbabies, I am busy being a 3rd grade teacher. This is my 16th year teaching. I've taught 1st grade, 2nd grade, and now 3rd grade. And I love it. I love my students. And one thing that I have learned a lot about over the last 2 years is how to be a more trauma-informed educator in my classroom. So I am trying desperately to implement those things for the betterment of my students and for myself. So we just want to welcome you to this weekend, and I hope that you just get so much out of it. There are some good parts to being a pastor's wife. And I think when we first got out of ministry, I was very reluctant to see that. But I would say for me, one of the best parts of being in ministry with my husband was that we had an opportunity to have a shared vision and to work together to revitalize churches that were literally on the verge of closing their doors. In every church plant that Karl was a part of, these churches were down to about 10 to 12 people. We were looking at closing the door, and then they hired Karl. And especially in our last church, they not only interviewed him, but they interviewed me. So I did really feel like there was going to be some shared vision, especially in that last church. I think for me, that meant a lot because it just allowed Karl and I to work more as a team. In our first church, it was a little more difficult raising very small children. Our youngest was 6 months old when Karl was at his first church. And so much of what happened in ministry was solely on his shoulders. So I loved seeing the progression as we transitioned and our kids got older and we transitioned to different churches, that we had more of a shared vision, and we went into each new assignment kind of locking arms with each other and having that shared vision. So before I dive into the trauma of religion or of church, I want to talk about how trauma is very subjective. And I think that's important because something that I've heard a lot since leaving organized religion was when telling my story, I hear from other people, well, that doesn't happen in our church. Well, that never happened to me. And unfortunately, that's a conversation stopper a lot of times. When we say that to someone who has experienced trauma in the church, a lot of times we stop them from finishing sharing their story with us. So knowing that trauma is subjective, what might have been traumatizing for me may not have been traumatizing for someone else who was a pastor's wife or within the walls of the church. The opposite is also true. What is traumatizing for someone else may not have been traumatizing for me. The point is that whether it's true for me or not, their story is valid, and so is mine. And so I just wanted to make that clarification that trauma is subjective and it is something that we store in our bodies. And whether that started in the church or started prior to the church is something that I constantly evaluate. And so that being said, much of my trauma that I experienced in ministry came from probably abandonment issues in my childhood with my father. My father was kind of hit or miss with me as a child, but then within the last 30 years, he has been non-existent, no communication with me, with my sisters, with his grandchildren or his great-grandchildren. So there are some huge abandonment issues with me. That being said, in addition to that, also I have the personality of a rule follower. And so as long as I know what the rules are, I will follow them. But what I found out that the rules in organized religion have a tendency to change based on, I don't know what causes them to change, but they have a tendency to change based on maybe the new leadership or the denomination. At any moment they can change. And so that was always very confusing to me because as long as I know the rules, I'm fine with following them. So I do have some stories of each church that we were a part of. So our first ministry was in a very, very small town, Stella, and it was actually a village because there were only like 250 people there. And again, this was a church that was on the verge of closing its doors. They had maybe 12 members there, and our family was called in. Karl was called in to be the new pastor. And with that, in a very small town, a lot of times they have things that kind of bring the town together. So in this particular instance, it was a street dance, and we were encouraged by church members and other family members of those church members to go to this street dance in order to get to know people, let them know that we were the new pastor and family in town, and hopefully, I guess, welcome them to our church, maybe get them to come to our church. So in the midst of this street dance, a slow song came on. And before the slow song came on, Karl and I were just doing, talking to people, introducing ourselves, getting to know people. And this song came on, and we both agreed to dance with each other in the street at the street dance. And we didn't dance any other dance the rest of that night. We didn't dance with any other people. I didn't even dance with a group of women, nothing like that. But what happened the next day was so incredibly shocking and shaming to me, because what happened was that the people that had encouraged us to go to the street dance were the ones that came down on us for actually dancing at this street dance. And it was just very shaming. I felt incredibly dirty and as if I had done something so horribly wrong when all I did was had a slow dance with my husband. There was no inappropriate touching or gyrating or anything like that. We just simply danced. Um, but I remember that feeling of shame as if it were yesterday. It was just so palatable. And I just really did not even want to show my face around town. And truly, if I look back on it now, I realized that I had done nothing wrong. But in the moment, I felt like I had just done something so terrible in the eyes of the Lord, in the eyes of the church. And it was just really hard to live outside of that shame. Another thing that happened was, especially with women in the church, I was ignored a lot and I was not included in a lot of things. And typically this would happen when the women of the church were not getting their way. And so they would go through me to try to get to Karl. I don't know if they thought that ignoring me would cause me to run to Karl and get him to change his mind on something. But they really didn't know my husband that well because once, Karl really thinks about things. And when he thought that something was the right thing to do, you could plead your case, but he was really going to do what was best for the church, the community, the denomination. And it was very hard to change his mind. And I didn't really feel like it was my job to do that anyway. People would also like try to use our children to get Karl to change his mind. And so these things were very devastating to me because I felt like here we are in church. Isn't the Christian community supposed to be about unconditional love and working together? And I felt so often that there was very little distinction between what I was experiencing in the world versus what was going on in church. It was very gray. Everything seemed to me very much the same. What I had experienced with abandonment and isolation or issues of ignoring me in my childhood were happening inside the church. And so that never made sense to me. And it was very traumatizing. And then also that idea of rules changing. Just if people didn't like what, Karl had decided or something that I was doing, then they would change the rules. And the dance was kind of a prime example of that, where it was okay to go to the dance, but nobody said it was not okay to dance with my husband. And I think that's what brings on a lot of shame and trauma. And it's very deep seated for me. And again, I'm not saying that all of this started within the church, but the church was not a safe place for me not to experience or have more trauma piled on top of the trauma I had already experienced in childhood. My coping skills over the 20 years of our ministry were not the healthiest. I can say that now, looking back. So I would have a tendency to isolate myself. I would stay in our small little house with my children, and just not venture out. Like I said, when that street dance happened, it was very hard for me to show my face in town because I felt so much shame. And so just not even wanting to go to the local store to, grab a drink or something like that. I just felt that all eyes were on me and judging me. And so my coping skills were more of isolation and just not being involved, staying out of the way, making myself small, losing my voice, all those things. And honestly, looking back, I think that probably made our particular denomination happy. I was not creating or causing any waves if I would just be small and be quiet. Salvaging religion, that's a tricky one for me because I don't really see the need to salvage religion. Um, Spirituality, personal spirituality, I believe there's something to that. And I believe that we all need to foster that because it is just that personal connection with ourselves and with the divine. And I think that's important. But if we're going to attempt to salvage religion, I almost think that there needs to be a complete dismantling of it. I'm not thinking that there's anything incredibly valuable. There may be some community, but I feel like since leaving organized religion, Karl and I have found incredible community outside the walls of the church and community that is lasting and is deep. To make the community of organized religion or the church community better, I think we have to take out the power, the desire to be in control. I think that desire to be in control is what continually shifts the rules, like I was talking about earlier. It continually leaves people in a state of shame and unworthiness and questioning their very essence. And I think that that is what I would probably say to the board of directors or the women, is that every single person is valuable. In my opinion, the current state of religion, I do not think it can be salvaged. I think it needs to be completely deconstructed. Some steps that I've taken to heal from my trauma are definitely going inside, finding a spiritual director to talk to, finding somebody who is all about listening and not about fixing. I think hearing stories of other people in the desert has been incredibly healing for me. So much of stepping out into the deconstruction world or stepping outside the walls of organized religion, it feels very isolating and it feels very alone. And while I know I did that while I was inside the church due to shame, it was very lonely when I first chose to deconstruct. And it felt very freeing to know that there were other people that had experienced the same thing. Because so many times we think we're the only ones that are going through whatever it is that we're going through. And part of the reason for that is because our shame keeps us silent. And so opening up, telling my story, being able to share with other people, having them share with me, it helped me realize that there is a community out there of people that have been wounded by organized religion as well. So sharing my story, knowing when and where and with whom to share my story has been really important to me. Like Brene Brown says, people have to earn the right to hear your story. And I think that's really important. Also meditating and just finding time in nature has also been very healing to me, knowing that I'm connected with everything outside of me in a very different way, knowing that where I thought that this God, this divine was out there somewhere unattainable, instead realizing that in nature, I can commune with the divine just by listening to the birds or feeling the breeze blow through my hair. So I would say being out in nature has been probably the most healing thing for me. I've also done some hypnosis and actually some talk therapy. So I think all these things can be beneficial. I think it's important to find what works for you, and don't let anyone tell you that any of it is wrong, or if we just had enough faith that we wouldn't need such things, because I think they are all valuable tools. So the story that I tell is specifically about Holland. So Holland is my first grandchild to be born to us. And this was about 6 years ago when she was born. And I just remember going to, it was the day that she was born, and she was only a couple hours old, but I remember going to the hospital room and holding her for the first time. And this sense just came over me. It was as if she and I were the only ones in the room. I was holding her right against my heart. And I remember just putting my head down, and there was no one else in the room, or so it seemed. There really were other people in the room, but we just had this connection right off the bat. And it was as if, and I wasn't sure where I was with God at that point, but it was as if God had just whispered in my ear, "This is how I feel about you." Um, just that connection that goes beyond words. And I do feel like that is about the time that we were beginning to be more vocal about our deconstruction. And I just think that she was helping me to heal in that moment, and knowing that that's what it's all about, is this connection with self, this connection with divine that goes beyond words. And since then, we've had two more grandchildren. And especially with our grandson, I have that same connection now because he is nonverbal. And so we can sit there and we can snuggle, and it is as if no one else is around us, and we can just commune together. So my grandchildren have just taught me so much about just that sense of belonging, that sense of connection, that sense of oneness with self and with just with others that transcends words. Well, being trauma informed has allowed, I think, both of us to give each other way more grace than we used to, especially even in ministry. I think it allows us to take a breath and listen to the other person. But it also allows us, I think, to acknowledge when we are feeling triggered or shame or whatever it is that we're feeling, and be able to articulate that. Whereas I do think that earlier in our marriage, and especially when things were incredibly busy and chaotic in ministry, we didn't really make time for each other in order to do that. And so I do think being trauma informed has allowed us to not only give each other, ourselves, more grace, but has allowed us to just open up more to each other and be able to be more transparent with how we're feeling and dealing with things, and not to judge each other. So when we're in a shame spiral or something like that, but just to learn to sit with each other, not try to fix each other. And I think that's really important. And I think we've learned that just by a lot of the interviews that we've had. I think early on in the Desert Sanctuary, we probably felt the need to fix the people that we were interviewing. But through all the things that we've learned about being trauma informed, we now prefer to sit with someone and feel what they're feeling, rather than fixing because we know that the idea of fixing themselves, and that's really not the word I want to use, but of coming to an understanding about themselves is really going to come from within. So I think that's probably been the biggest thing that I've learned about our marriage in this journey. I definitely think that teaching right now, kind of the big idea is being a trauma informed educator. And so I've been able to go through a couple of professional developments that have helped me understand trauma in a different way, and understanding that even these little bodies that are in my classroom have experienced trauma or are experiencing trauma. And so it has helped me be a more compassionate, understanding teacher. It's helped me to have empathy with expectations. So it's not about allowing, bad behavior, but it's about trying to drill down and understand and teach students more positive coping mechanisms when they are feeling triggered. So I think that is easy to transfer from not only the classroom, but then to our daily lives and vice versa. I do think that I'm able to be more of an influence now than inside the church. And I think primarily because it's just based on our denomination mainly. Women were not necessarily encouraged to be outspoken, or, unless it was in a women's Bible study or in the nursery or something like that, teaching young children Sunday school. But I do feel that since leaving organized religion, I have been able to find my voice. I have been able to speak my truth. And in that respect, I am more available to help. And by help, I mean listen and be there for people that might be struggling with similar situations. I think if I was able to put something on a billboard, it would be to be authentically you, to not sacrifice who you are deep down in your core to fit into your church, to fit into your work. You need to find your truth. What is it that brings you life? What is it brings you joy? That's what you need to follow. For me, I think that what I am down deep in my core is wildly passionate about people and just caring for those on the margin, those that have been marginalized, realizing that just all those things don't matter at the core of who we are. It doesn't matter how you identify, what your sexuality is. It doesn't matter whether you're verbal or nonverbal. Those things don't matter at the depths of who you are. And they don't matter at the depths of who I am. That we are all worthy of love and belonging. And I think that's what's most important to me.